Research tells us that there are three factors that converge to create a sense of compassion fatigue. Burnout, which is something that I know a lot of us are experiencing also, but there are two other factors too. There's secondary trauma and compassion satisfaction. Now, burnout itself means that we're suffering from, again, three sort of factors, and I call them the three E's. The first is a loss of energy, feeling like, oh man, I'm not even sure I can make it out of bed today. The second E is a loss of enthusiasm. So you start to wonder, why in the world am I even doing this? Why am I even here? That's also something that is very common with burnout. And the third E is loss of effectiveness. So we start to see our productivity slide downhill. We can develop burnout when we are working in very high stress and demanding work environments, especially if we feel like we have little to no control over those environments. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Secondary trauma means that we are traumatized by hearing or experiencing the trauma that other people are undergoing. And the symptoms of secondary trauma are very similar. They can develop very quickly, and they're very similar to what people experience with PTSD, for example. So feeling like you are afraid, you're not always sure why, but there are triggers in your environment that might trigger that sense of fear. Having intrusive thoughts about the trauma that you heard about, and trying to actively avoid those things that remind you of that traumatic event. Now, compassion fatigue will rise when both of these first factors, burnout and secondary trauma, are very high, but it will also rise if the third element is very low, compassion satisfaction. This is the pleasure that we who care for people in our professions, this is the pleasure that we take in our work. This is our jam, caring for other people. We are passionate. We invest a lot of time and energy into other people, and this is a source of joy and fulfillment for us. The first point that I'd like to make is none of these have sort of an on-off switch to them. You're not either burned out or not. You are probably somewhere on a spectrum of, being stressed out up to burnout. There are assessment tools that are out there that can help us all determine where on the spectrum we lie on all three of these factors: burnout, secondary trauma, compassion satisfaction. One very good one is called the Professional Quality of Life Scale. That is going to be included as a link. It's a free assessment tool. You can find it on the internet, but I will include it in a document that will be shared with you in a follow-up email after the session is over. The second point that I want to make is that it's really the convergence of these three factors that determines the severity of our compassion fatigue. And the third point is that, like most complex disorders like clinical anxiety, clinical depression, PTSD, compassion satisfaction is also a very complex disorder, and it can arise from different patterns of these three things playing off each other. So some people will experience compassion fatigue because they have witnessed a relatively recent event of trauma that they watch someone else go through. Another person may be feeling compassion fatigue because they have severe burnout. So it can arise from different patterns. And the question that I'd like for you all to share your thoughts on in the chat is, where are you right now? Where do you feel like you are? Where do you feel like your team members are right now?